The year was 1947. The average cost of a new home was less than $7,000. You could get a new car for around $1,000, and gas was 15 cents a gallon. The first Polaroid camera was demonstrated to the public. The sound barrier was broken for the first time by Chuck Yeager. And the transistor was invented at Bell Laboratories. Yes, the times they were a-changing in 1947. The CIA was created. Hillary Clinton was born. And in a way, so was Israel when the United Nations voted in favor of the creation of an independent Jewish state after years of Jewish terrorist attacks on the British and the Palestinians. Ah, yes, 1947, when the Anglosphere wasn't exactly super excited about Israel or the Jewish Zionist terror groups like Irgun, who on July 22nd, 1946, had disguised themselves as Arab women, planted bombs in the basement of the King David Hotel, and then killed 91 people and injured 46, mostly British. Or when the same Jewish terror group killed 2 British guards at the Jerusalem railway station on October 30th, 1946. Or when the same Jewish terror group bombed the British embassy in Rome a day later. Or when the same Jewish terror group killed 4 more British soldiers on January 12th, 1947, when they bombed the British headquarters. Or when the same Jewish terror group killed 17 British officers when they bombed the Goldschmidt Officers Club on January 31st. Or when they kidnapped and hung 2 British sergeants on July 29th, 1947. Or when the same Jewish terror group detonated 2 suitcase bombs on August 4th in the basement of the Hotel Satcher. I could keep going, but as we all know today, none of that matters. In 1947, the Anglosphere was just simply infected with a poison called antisemitism. But lucky for us, 1947 is also when they began to roll out the cure. You see, 1947 was also the year that the Diary of Anne Frank was published. And for the less literate, the film A Gentleman's Agreement was in theaters. And we know it must have been a fantastic piece of cinema because it won 3 Oscars, including the Oscar for Best Picture. In 1947, A Gentleman's Agreement was released, the same year that the novel by the same name was released. The novel by Laura Z. Hobson, a communist Jewish writer from Manhattan and daughter of Mikhail Zemtkin, her father, who was a communist labor organizer and co-founder of the Jewish Daily Forward, and her mother, Adela Zemtkin, who wrote for a socialist paper called Der Tag. The film version of Hobson's book was directed by Elia Kazan and starring the outspoken socialist Gregory Peck. The film begins with Gregory Peck's character, Philip Green, a writer and widower with his son newly arrived in New York. He has been hired for an assignment at a liberal New York magazine. The assignment, he discovers, is a series on antisemitism. At first, Green is not too excited about the project, but then he meets his boss's niece, an upper-class WASP divorcee named Kathy Lacey, whose idea it was to write the series. He is further motivated to write the series after telling his mother, who he and his son are staying with in New York, that he's not too pleased with the assignment, and his son begins to ask questions about what anti-Semitism is. He decides he doesn't want to live in a world where his son has to even worry about that. So he tells the editor that he'll do the story, but for the longest time, he can't figure out an interesting angle. He bangs his head against the wall, just trying to think of a creative, new way to present the problem of anti-Semitism to the Christians. One night, while he's trying to get through his writer's block, his mother has a heart attack, and he calls the doctor. She's confined to her bed, and now his situation is even worse because he has to do everything around the house that his mother was doing. He explains to his mother that he's having a really hard time figuring out how to come up with a fresh angle on the story. And that's when he gets an idea. He decides he's going to pretend to be Jewish for 6 months and write about how he experiences anti-Semitism firsthand. He finally has his angle. But he completely forgets to tell his new love, Kathy, because he's also going to propose to her tonight. And she, of course, accepts. The next day, he tells the editor what he plans to do. The editor thinks it's a great idea. They decide that for it to really work, though, they have to tell everyone, even the people at the office, that he's Jewish. The only way it can work is if nobody is in on the trick, and that includes Phil's new secretary. Upon meeting his new secretary, he tells her that he wants to start sending applications for jobs and to universities, 2 identical sets. The only difference will be that on one set, it'll be under the name of Green, and the other set will be under the name Greenberg. That's when she tells him that, of course, the Greenbergs will be rejected. She explains that she is a Jew and that she had to pretend not to be Jewish in order to get a job at the magazine. She said they wouldn't have hired her if they knew that she was Jewish. They wouldn't have hired her at a liberal magazine in New York if they knew that she was Jewish. I found this a little amazing, considering the fact that many publishers, including the New York Times, was owned and operated by Jewish families in 1947, not to mention nearly every film studio and broadcast network. The idea that it would be difficult for a Jew to get employment at a liberal New York publication in 1947 is just as laughable as it would be today. In fact, the author of A Gentleman's Agreement was both a Jew and a communist, and she was published in Time, the New York Post, Life, and Fortune magazines. She was also published in The New Yorker, a magazine exactly like this fictional magazine in the movie and her book. And this was all before her book or this movie came out. In fact, the publisher of her book, Simon & Schuster, was founded and run by 2 Jews, Richard Simon and Max Schuster. Just the premise that the American media in 1947 would be anti-Semitic is ludicrous enough, but the film takes an even more bizarre turn. His secretary says she's glad there aren't a lot of Jews in publishing, because if the bad ones, and she by that means other Jews, got hired, then it would turn everyone against the good ones like her and Philip. And remember, this movie won the Oscar for Best Picture. When Phil gets home, he tells the doctor that he has the name of a heart specialist that he'd like his mother to see. The doctor is taken aback when the name he gives him is a Jewish name. It's Dr. Abrams. He says, "Don't worry, though. He's not like the other Jewish doctors. He doesn't overcharge." Phil acts very offended and tells the doctor that, well, he's Jewish, to which the doctor says, "Oh, that's fine by him, and he's not prejudiced, of course." But now he looks uncomfortable, and he leaves. Phil then goes down to the mailbox and adds the name Greenberg to his box. The super tells him that's not a good idea and wants him to leave the name off. The implication, of course, is that he doesn't want a Jewish name where people can see it. Phil threatens him and leaves angry. Phil then goes to see his new fiancée and finally tells her of his plan. Kathy doesn't like the plan and wants to let her friends and family in on it. He gets upset and implies that maybe she's anti-Semitic too. Sure, it was her idea to write the series, but it seems that everyone he encounters in New York is treating him like a pariah, including his fiancée, who knows it's just a trick. When he goes into the office the next day, he tells the editor his secretary had to pretend not to be Jewish just to get her job at this so-called liberal magazine. The editor is shocked and calls in the clearly anti-Semitic Gentile that does all the hiring and tells him to run new ads advertising they will hire Jews and not to discriminate anymore or he'll be sorry. Afterwards, his secretary tells him that was a bad idea. The magazine's going to start hiring Jews now, and that'll make other people working there hate Jews. His secretary, a Jew, is literally telling him that the mere presence of Jews, who she describes as loud and vulgar, will cause the other people at the magazine to be anti-Semitic. Just the mere presence of if they hire Jews, it'll make everyone at the magazine hate Jews. Philip becomes enraged and tells her that she's now being anti-Semitic, and that if she wants to keep working for him, she'd better check her anti-Semitism. Remember, he's not really Jewish. She is. And also remember, this movie got an Oscar for Best Picture. This sort of thing keeps going on and on throughout the entire film. Everyone, it would seem, except for Phil, is a secret anti-Semite. At a party, Phil is introduced to a Jewish physicist who is likely based loosely on Einstein. He says he doesn't believe in God, and that the only reason he continues to call himself a Jew is because being a Jew puts you at a disadvantage. He says that he sees it as a challenge because being a Jew makes everything in life harder. And so he continues to call himself a Jew despite being an atheist. And according to this film, the physicist is correct. Phil's Jewish friend, a real Jew, comes to stay with him after he gets out of the army. When they're out to dinner, a man comes up to him for absolutely no reason and just tells him he doesn't like Jews and tries to fight him. At the country club Phil wants to stay at for his honeymoon, they cancel his reservation when he tells them that he's a Jew. The kids at his son's school hear that his father's Jewish and refuse to play with him and start threatening him. When this happens, his fiancée tries to comfort the boy and tells him, don't worry, you're not really Jewish. And Phil flies into another rage and starts calling her anti-Semitic again. She says she can't handle the stress of this social experiment anymore, and she calls off the wedding. Which is too bad, because finally Phil's experiment is complete. He delivers the first part of his article to his editor, and everyone is shocked to find out that he's not really a Jew, and they feel ashamed for having treated him so poorly. Even Phil's now ex-fiancée feels guilty. She calls up Phil's real Jewish friend and tells him to come have dinner with her so they can talk. When he arrives, she asks him if he thinks that she's anti-Semitic. And after talking about how she has stood idly by while others have told racist jokes, and by not being a champion against bigotry, by not being proactive, a warrior for social justice, that yes, perhaps in a way, she is. Meanwhile, Phil's mother has just read the first part of his article, and she tells him that she hopes she can live long enough to see a world without anti-Semitism, that she's so proud of her son for fighting bigotry in Manhattan. And after a talk with his real Jewish friend about what he has learned with this social experiment, he decides to forgive his anti-Semitic WASP girlfriend because, you see, it's not her fault. Anti-Semitism is just a disease that affects all Gentiles, even those with the best intentions who don't like racist jokes. Hell, it even infected some of the Jews, like Phil's secretary. But perhaps through the hard work and sacrifices of heroes like Phil, the diseased Gentiles will finally learn to stop hating Jews for no reason at all. For BlackPilled, I'm Devin Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure you share. If you want to support my work, you can go to patreon.com or Subscribestar, send crypto to one of the addresses below, or just grab a copy of my book. Paperback and audiobook is available. Links for all in the description.